Hey everybody, and welcome to another Tausken review. Today we're going to be taking a look at command&Conquer Remastered Collection. As a long-term fan of the command&Conquer series, I was thrilled when I heard that EA was remastering the original two command&Conquer games. Of course, that came with quite a bit of cautious optimism given EA's past with the command&Conquer series and other games, which made me a little bit worried that this was going to be a bit of a dumpster fire, either with microtransactions stuck in, lacking in content, or other issues. What I can report is that thankfully this is one of the better remasters I've ever seen. Command&Conquer Remastered is an absolute blast to play. EA, Lemon Sky, and Petroglyph have all done a fantastic job at bringing this old game up to snuff by really polishing it out quite a bit. It really looks just beautiful and gorgeous in almost every way. There are still some rough edges here and there, but they've done the best that they could to really create something that's truly amazing and really brings the spirit of the series back again. If there's one thing that you can say, it's that the Command&Conquer Remastered Collection includes a crap ton of content. You've got Tiberian Dawn and its expansion Covert Ops, along with the dinosaur missions being converted, the console missions being converted over, and it has Red Alert and its two expansions Counter-Strike and Aftermath. They've even brought in the FMVs and cinematic stuff that was from the Red Alert console version and brought those in. So it's just a ton of content. You could easily spend just like 40 to 60, 80 hours just playing through missions depending on how good or bad you are or how much you really want to dig into it. There's just such a wealth of content here. And that's not even touching on things like multiplayer or user-created missions that you could also play. Let's start with the graphics and what they've done there. They've remastered every single unit, building, piece of terrain, and even some of the unused units, like things like the helicarrier and stuff like that. In the single player, you have the option to swap between the old and the new graphics by pressing the spacebar, and the difference is huge. And it's very faithful to the original, which is really cool because it feels kind of like the StarCraft Remastered devs used to talk about how they wanted it to feel like you were just putting on your glasses. And I think that's perfectly what this game's remaster is like. I mean, the buildings look perfectly like they used to, just with some added details. It looks like you almost would have imagined it to look like if you were just visualizing it in your head before having played it. And that's what makes it such a good remaster. It's just very faithful to the original. I've also added some things like larger screen size resolution support, which of course was in like the CNC community versions, but now it just looks so much better with the updated graphics. You've got things like the ability to zoom in and zoom out, and the models look really detailed despite the fact that they're obviously pretty small units that are just on the screen, but it's crazy how much detail Lemon Sky has put into the actual artwork of this game. In particular, things like simple buildings like the barracks, the war factory look so good and so much more detailed than they used to, which is great and I love. The tanks look great. The infantrymen, I feel like they've done some nice adjustments where they've made things a lot more distinctive. Like in the old original Command & Conquer, it's a little bit hard at a glance to kind of tell the difference between like a grenadier and a regular minigunner. You can kind of see like one guy has like a little stripe on him that's slightly different, but they're very similar kind of at a glance just looking at it, but they look so much more distinct in this one, which is great. They've also added a lot of details to things like the nukes, which despite look pretty cool back then, but they look so much better in the new remaster. Like, they've added a ton of detail to make them feel really powerful. In addition to that, the sounds are really good. Small things like the infantry getting crushed sound just as good as they did back in the 90s, or the obelisks blasting, or tanks rolling around, all sound great and really bring you back to what Command & Conquer is about, that chaos and explosions and all the awesomeness going on. They've also brought back Frank Klepacki to do the sounds, and they're just as good as they were back in the 90s. Like, these remastered tracks that Frank Klepacki has done are fantastic. You know, simple things like remastering Hell's March or Crush or Mud from Red Alert or No Mercy, they all just sound freaking awesome. Like, it is just such a treat when you come into this game as a fan and veteran of the series and then just hear these sounds blasting. In addition to this, they've also had Frank Klepacki's own band called the Tiberian Sons perform some versions of different songs like Hell's March. And those ones sound really good as well and really round out the soundtrack with just a crazy amount of songs that you can listen to. The gameplay itself has been preserved with some quality of life enhancements. It looks and plays just like Command & Conquer, as you imagined. You go out and gather your Tiberium or ore, build your tanks, crush your enemies. And this is either a good thing or a bad thing, because the sidebar has been remodeled, which is awesome, and now features a more Red Alert 2-like split between buildings, infantry, tanks, support powers. They've also added hotkeys for all buildings and infantry, giving you the option to queue up units with hotkeys or different things like that. You can also change the hotkeys, which is pretty cool compared to before. You can now toggle between using left click as you would in the traditional CNC way, or using right click like more modern RTS games. And they've even added the option to use the right click to scroll around like you can in later Command and Conquer games to these original two. Unit queuing has also been added, allowing you to queue up like multiple units at a time like Red Alert 2, so you don't have to just click every second to build an infantry and get carpal tunnel. You can now just queue up like 100 guys, which is pretty sweet. Though I did run into some bugs, like the unit queuing sometimes would turn itself off randomly and I'd have to turn it back on. Otherwise, all these QL enhancements are pretty awesome. The only thing is, for some modern RTS players, you might play this and feel like, where the heck is the attack move option, which is of course lacking. You've still got things like the guard command that you can use to get around it, but it's not quite the same as like a modern RTS game. It didn't bother me as a veteran, but newer players might be a little bit bothered by some of these things. They've also added Skirmish to Tiberian Dawn, which is a welcome change given that the game lacked it when it came out, but the AI could really use some work here. It doesn't seem quite as smart as Red Alert's Skirmish, which is already pretty bad and lacks building enough units and things to really pose any kind of a challenge to players. It seems to do really strange things too, like it'll randomly build air units for no reason, or not tech at all, or build like 10 guys where it'll build like one Apache and one tank and one infantry guy and one grenadier, and then just kind of use that as its army, which makes no sense. It really could use some work, and I hope they look into it, but overall the gameplay is basically a lot like what you would expect. Bonus Gallery is a pretty cool feature for veteran fans. It basically unlocks as you play different missions and allows you to watch like green screen footage, behind the scenes footage of them actually filming the FMVs or different cinematic things. It's pretty cool because if you like kind of looking into that behind the scenes background stuff, it's got a ton of stuff. Like there's just a crazy amount of unlockables here. So if you're really into that stuff, they've got you covered here. Multiplayer is an area where I feel that they both failed and succeeded. It definitely works in the sense that you can create joint matches or do ranked 1v1, but it's lacking tons of other things, like where's the 2v2 or other ranked options? It also doesn't seem to have any kind of stats. Like, unless you're in the top 200, you can't even see your wins or losses. It only shows the top 200 players' wins and losses. And I can't see things like, what is my percent wins against GDI or NOD? Like, all these simple things that every other competitive RTS game seems to have. It also lacks things like private lobbies. So you can still do things like choosing game speed, picking if you want crates or no crates and other gameplay options, but it's lacking simple things like private lobbies. What if I want to play with a friend? I gotta constantly keep booting people out. There's also things like, say I host a custom map, right? It should just automatically download the map or show the map's name for players who want to play with me on a custom map. But instead, you have to tell them what the name is because it'll give you this gibberish at the top and not even tell them what to actually download to play with you. It's simple things like that that are just so stupid and lacking. I'm also not a fan of the map pool for Tiberian Dawn. For some reason, they decided to use a bunch of vanilla maps, which are complete garbage. They really should have looked at the community-ran CNCnet servers and taken a look at the servers that people were playing on those, because they were far more balanced, so that you didn't have these just ridiculous maps that give clear advantages to GDI or NOD and are just ridiculously imbalanced. And also, for some reason, in Red Alert, you start with a bunch of units. This is also a problem in Tiberian Dawn, because traditionally, on the community-ran things, you start with just your MCV, which is way more balanced, because otherwise, if you're playing in Red Alert, one faction has one tank, and another has two at the start. It's just stupid. And also, for some reason, the maps for Tiberian Dawn are only 4 players only. So there's no 2-player, or 8-player, or 6-player maps. That's all there is in the vanilla maps. It's also a bit strange to me that they only allow up to 4 players total for a Tiberian Dawn map when the community servers have been supporting way more. I've also had some strange lag issues at times, but I'm hoping that's just due to launch issues. So I know I've complained a lot, but that's just because I'm passionate. I've still had a ton of fun playing the ranked 1v1s or playing with friends, but this thing just needs way more polish on the multiplayer. It just feels half done. Also, simple things like adding in a brief overview that would show you a picture of the map you are queuing into, because Command and Conquer, unlike other RTS games, doesn't reveal the full map and just have the fog of war. Instead, the fog of war is hiding the entire map. So you have to basically explore it to actually see things, which is a huge disadvantage for new players who are trying to learn the game. There's also an updated map editor, which is great, and I do expect to see tons of community maps, and I'm already seeing a bunch of interesting ones that I've used on CNCnet showing up in the Steam's workshop. But I really want to see these things in ranked play standardized around some better maps that are from the community, because they are significantly better. And last is the campaign, which is back in all its glory. They've remastered the old cinematics as well by upscaling them with AI, and they look surprisingly good. There is some issues because sometimes they weren't able to get a higher quality version of the source, where some of the cinematics look significantly better than others, but It's not that big a deal if you've actually played the original game or if you can deal with the fact that some of the stuff looks a little bit crummy. In particular, some like the orca flying through the canyon look very dated, but others look pretty great. Some of the close-ups on the faces, which is kind of how a lot of the cinematics and FMVs are in Command & Conquer, look pretty good because there's not a whole lot of movement and actually have upscaled fantastic. The missions themselves are a ton of fun and have aged pretty well. I had an absolute blast playing through both Tiberian Dawn and Red Alert. Though Tiberian Dawn is a bit challenging. It was significantly harder than Red Alert. So if you're a bit new to RTS games or maybe new to Command & Conquer, you might want to look at playing Red Alert first because it's a lot easier at kind of easing you into how Command & Conquer plays. Part of the issue too is that Command & Conquer is very, very chaotic. Like, units will just die really fast, either getting run over by tanks or having a grenadier just explode over a clump of infantry and just blowing away tons of your guys. But despite that, I had a ton of fun playing through the missions. They're a bit puzzle-like, especially in Tiberian Dawn, where you kind of try and figure out the strategies and tactics that will work to win different missions. And they have a very varied landscape, which is very much ahead of its time for RTS games at the time. Like, there's some missions where you just have a handful of guys, or you have a commando or a Tanya who can sneak around. There's others where you'll have like a ruined base. You have to kind of haphazardly try and hold together while you fend off waves or escort things. There's some missions where you'll actually build a base and go out on the map killing things. The Red Alert missions are a bit less interesting, I felt like, though, than Tiberian Dawn, just because a lot of them felt like tank and spank. You kind of just spam a bunch of tanks and then run them at your enemy and blow them up. But despite that, they're both really fun. Red Alert also has a bit of divergence because it adds naval units, which mixes up the gameplay a little bit. Overall, Command & Conquer the Remastered Collection is an absolute blast, especially if you're a veteran. The upscaled cinematics look great, the cheesiness of it is back, which is so much fun. It's got that same chaotic, crazy action feel of Command & Conquer that's just so much fun. The only things that I really had issues with was the fact that the multiplayer in this game just feels a bit underdeveloped. And that's why I'm going to give this game an 8 out of 10. I think it could very easily be a 9 out of 10, and if you're just only playing this for, say, the single player, this is easily like a 9 out of, or a 10 out of 10 almost. It's just that dang good. My problem is that I really wanted to get into the multiplayer, and it just feels like they kind of underdeveloped this. But if you can ignore that, then this game is just so much fun. Even despite that, it's such a good thing that I would highly recommend it to anyone who's even remotely interested. It is such a good remaster, and I really hope to see EA do the same attention to detail with Red Alert 2 and Tiberian Sun if we are to get a remaster of those two.